Hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. It is with great pleasure that we launch another episode of the Distinguished Speaker Series put on by Duke's Fuqua School of Business. I'm Bill Bolding, and I'm extremely pleased that we have Rich Lesser, the global CEO of the Boston Consulting Group, joining us. Rich is now closing in on 9 years in the CEO role. In addition to the CEO role with BCG, he is also the climate advisor to the CEO climate leaders for the World Economic Forum, and sits on the board of directors for the Business Roundtable, and is charged with leading the COVID CEO response. And so he's in a position to share not only his experiences from within BCG, but looking across a wide variety of companies around the world. And so I'm absolutely thrilled to have you with us, Rich. One other thing I'll mention before I let you speak is that we're hoping to work under Chatham House rules tonight, which is to say we would appreciate if there's no tweeting, social media posts, and so on. What Chatham House rules mean, if you're not familiar with the concept, is that you certainly can share what you've heard. You simply can't attribute it to Rich or to BCG. And eventually it's possible that this video will go live, at which point the cone of silence is lifted. But for now, those are the rules, and please do respect Rich and abide by those rules. So with that, welcome, Rich.
It's a pleasure to be with you. So I wish I could be there in person, but this will have to do.
Yes, so it's for your life. I'm sure that this has been a challenging time when you're used to being constantly on the road. Have you gotten back out on the road at all?
Not at all. I've since I landed back from India on March 6th. I have not been on a plane since then. It's by far the longest stretch since high school, I think. And but I feel like I get around the world. I was with the head of our Africa business this morning. I'm going to be on an Asia call first thing in the morning. So you travel the world just in a totally different way than I would have ever expected.
Yes, these are extraordinary times, and we're so glad that you've traveled to our campus tonight. So I'm going to have a wide-ranging set of questions for you. And the first one really focuses in on your role at BCG, where I'm curious, given that BCG actually provides consulting advice to leaders making a transition into the role of CEO. In fact, I remember one of our board members giving me the BCG advice, and the thing I remember that I'll never forget is, imagine you're living your life on a 40-foot high screen. But I'm curious, given that you're in that company, was that especially challenging, knowing that all your partners either think or actually are real experts on CEO leadership?
Yes and no. I mean, it was less that. It's that, my predecessor had done an amazing job leading BCG out of a difficult period, like starting in 2004, tripled the firm in his 9 years at the helm. And so you come into this role with this weight of responsibility to, on the one hand, continue that sense of growth and vitality, and on the other hand, uphold sort of a sense of purpose and values and be on the leading edge of business thinking. So it was more the weight of the responsibility I was entrusted with. I actually found the partnership part of it one of the nice parts. I know I talk to a lot of CEOs. It can be a very lonely job. And I've got to be honest with you, I've never really felt alone. I felt like I'm accountable. I feel completely accountable, but I feel like I've got colleagues that I trust, and many of whom I've worked with for years, that speak honestly and openly. I felt like that was one of the assets of trying to lead a place like BCG.
So again, in the spirit of you have so many experts who are advising companies, CEOs around the world, does that mean that BCG, with all that expertise, is the world's best run firm? Or is it the case of the cobbler's shoes, or the cobbler's children? I'm sorry.
I think we try very much to take the advice that we give. I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, we wrote what it would take to win the 20s. And I just took that exact same framework and discussed it with my partners when we were together at our worldwide partner meeting. And I think this idea that I think the things you try to do to live a set of purpose and values, be forward looking, invest in innovation, focus on building the team around you. You know, a lot of the things that I do a lot of the new CEO workshops myself. I love engaging with new CEOs. I think it's one of the most interesting parts of what I get to do. It's such a critical time in their careers and for their organizations. As best possible, we try to live the same sort of values and principles that we talk about, and to be very forward looking to building for the long term. I think one of the privileges of a partnership that we own it ourselves is they face a set of short-term pressures. You know, the activists and quarterly earnings and a whole set of short-term pressures. I feel like I face a part of that, but not anywhere close to what they do. But on many other dimensions, it's not so different. And when we try to live the same principles we talk about with others.
Yeah. So before you became CEO, you actually headed up the New York office starting in 2000 for a number of years. And anyone who is doing the math at home realizes then that you were heading the New York office during 9/11. And so that was an incredible crisis where you were up close and personal with that crisis. How did that crisis inform you? What did you learn from that in terms of your own leadership capabilities?
I think the two crises I lived before this one were incredibly formative in my leadership career, because there were two. One was 9/11, leading New York, and then the other was leading New York and then North and South America through the great financial crisis in 2008 and 9. And those I think, well, first of all, you focus on the team. You know, in that moment, people are so destabilized. It feels like you've never seen anything like it before, which was true this time too. And I think to stay grounded in how do we support the people around us? How do we convey a sense of confidence even amidst a world of unknowns, and stay together, you know, work together through it. I think I felt personally very at risk. When you're in these, you also have to recognize the emotions you're feeling as a citizen of New York, or someone who walks the streets of New York, and you feel a sense of risk that you didn't feel before. So you have to be self-aware of what you're feeling, but then you have to really focus on the team. And then the second thing is, you know, we really learned, particularly in the second of those two crises, about committing to your clients in that, and you just invest. You know, for a period of time after these shocks, we're a very discretionary expense. It's easy to turn off consulting, at least for a little while. And I think and realizing just how much your clients have to know you're by their side when times are tough. And if they can't pay you for a while, they can't pay you, you just stick by them. And in the end, you know, you earn trust when it's the most difficult times. I mean, that's what you see over and over again. You earn it with your people and you earn it with your customers. And I think living through both of those really brought that home so much. And I think our clients appreciated it. And I saw it even though I wasn't involved, except on the executive committee, you know, when Fukushima happened in Japan, you know, you just start to realize, like, it's all about just the commitment that you show to helping people, clients or your people and your own teams through these sorts of experiences. And in this case, also societally. I mean, the difference of this one was there was such a societal lens as well, you know, what it was doing to health systems, to the public sector, the social impact organizations. So that really got layered on, but the spirit is not any different.
So I want to kind of zigzag a little bit, which is a focus on COVID, and given you're leading this response for the Business Roundtable, and you've developed some insights that you've shared around how to best respond to COVID. But I'll be doing a little bit of zigzagging back to 2008 and so on, and while I ask you about COVID. So you have advice, which is, first piece of advice is establish your values early on, and that to kind of quote you here, now is the time to reiterate your purpose and your values to your workforce. and that there's a much heavier responsibilities now for companies to communicate to the broader public and to the world about how they're living their purpose during an extraordinarily difficult time. So the zigzag here is, how do you think we're doing in articulating this sense of purpose now versus what happened in response to the '08 crisis?
I think you have to separate the public sector and the private sector in this case. I think in 2008-9, many people believed there was excesses in the private sector, too much risk taking, thinking more about Wall Street than Main Street, that was a direct cause of what happened. And there was, I think, justifiable, actually, anger at the business community. Not every individual business, most businesses had nothing to do with what happened in 08-09, but the business community in general. And it caused a huge deterioration in trust. There were also other issues going on at the same time, but that was a big cause of it. And the public sector was viewed as, government was viewed as not being as direct a cause, though there were clearly some regulatory lapses that contributed, and a big part of the solution in terms of trying to support communities and stimulus and so forth. I think this time around, you have to look at it from a different angle. I think most people realize business had nothing to do with this. And in most cases, I think there's exceptions, but most employers responded in very responsible ways, very quickly. Certainly as a community, I mean, I've been in so many private BRT discussions, no one around with CEOs, the emphasis over and over again, keep people safe. How do we get government to provide more guidance, not less? How do we get more testing, not less? How do we accelerate vaccines with Operation Warp Speed? I mean, I've watched the business community behave, I think, genuinely with an emphasis on doing right societally and for people, even ahead of doing right for business, though obviously stimulating the economy. It touches a lot of livelihoods, not just lives, and then has a benefit. I think the public sector response is in for a much more mixed view. On the positive side, I think the history books will say the management, we'll see what happens with stimulus right now. But if I take through the first wave of this, and even the second wave over the summer, the general handling of government to getting stimulus, money in people's pockets, protecting businesses, overall, I think we'll receive positive reviews, less so in the fourth quarter when we couldn't get stimulus passed. Hopefully we'll get something this week, we'll see, or next week. And on the flip side, obviously the health management of this will be very variable. I think the federal government response was not adequate in terms of specificity or aggressiveness or aligning around key measures, particularly mask wearing, recognizing indoor transmission nearly as early as the science made it clear that that was, those two factors were the single biggest risk factors. And on the other hand, I think our state governments have really varied. Some have done a reasonable job. Almost none of them you'd say were perfect. They had lapses over the 9 months we've been living with this. But I'd say mostly, a number of the state governments stepped up and some much less so. And we're seeing that, and we've seen it over time, in different locations. So I think that economically, pretty good response. Health-wise, really has let us down. And when we look at the incremental deaths versus Europe, at the same per capita death rate, and forgetting the size population differences, it's well over 100,000 incremental deaths in the US versus Europe. And and I'm sure there are factors, it's never a simple equation, but I think it's really come up short. And now we're in a very difficult stretch right now.
Yeah, so to summarize some of what you just said, in '08, whether or not responsible, the response from the public was that business caused the problems. And so we were at fault. Whereas what's so fascinating about the current environment is that in this country, Fauci is the single most trusted individual. But if you talk about an organization, the most trusted organization to tell you the truth about what you should do to protect your health is your employer. And so it really does seem to be a very different time for the business community coming through this crisis, where we're earning a little bit of trust and respect rather than burning up goodwill.
And it's beyond, truth telling has to be the starting point, but I would also say a number of businesses in their own ways have really stepped up to find where they could contribute. You know, I've talked to the CEOs of the major automakers and how they've retooled their operations to produce ventilators and masks, and, you know, the ways a number of the retailers responded. I think, again, you can always, we've never been through it before. It will always be possible to say what could have been done better, or what more could have been done. But the aggressiveness and sincerity across many parts of the business community, I think, have been observed by the public, which is encouraging. Now, the question is, can you keep that, the trust that you've earned as we get to the next phase? I mean, obviously, that's, it doesn't last forever if you don't work on it.
So, you know, part of this has to do with the business community seeming to respect multiple stakeholders rather than just worrying about making money. And so it seems like forever ago, but it wasn't that long ago that the BRT came out with this idea that let's move past shareholder capitalism and embrace stakeholder capitalism. So do you think that move by the BRT was to capture the reality of what you see companies doing? Was it a PR stunt? And how would you respond to the people who said, if you're not doing one thing, you're not doing anything. If you're not focusing on the shareholder, you're just going to get completely muddled?
So there's a couple responses to that. First, I would say first we have to recognize, you know, places like the World Economic Forum have been talking about multi-stakeholder capitalism for 40, 50 years. So this was a very revolutionary statement in the US relative to the Milton Friedman doctrines that had been talked about. It was not entirely new for the world, but it was a bold statement. I would describe it as neither at the bleeding edge nor simply a capturing of what had been done for years. I think there was enough momentum from enough companies, and particularly if you look at the membership of that group, there's some really just outstanding organizations there, and enough we're seeing it that there was a willingness to step, you know, in the 1/3, you know, at the top third, where you already had some doing it, many not, and make a clear statement. And it's been, I mean, I can't tell you how many conversations I've been in where we come back to that statement and what it means. But the second part of your statement's important. For most of the members, they would not say it is other stakeholders or shareholders. They would say two things. One is it's other stakeholders and shareholders, and that it's not about in any way diminishing the responsibility to produce sustainable and ideally advantaged returns over time. And two, that actually orienting to multiple stakeholders creates more long-term shareholder value. That if there's a trade-off, it's a trade-off of optimizing for the very short term on profitability versus a multi-stakeholder orientation, but that it's not, you can pose hypotheticals. There's even trade-off in a longer term sense, but honestly, the area of overlap grows so much higher between a multi-stakeholder orientation and long-term shareholder value orientation that I think for most of them, it is not viewed as we've chosen one group over another, or they're a seesaw, you pick one, you pick the other, it's a balance. It's more a synergy. If I do the multi-stakeholder stuff really well, and I earn trust and I earn credibility, and I'm constantly thinking about the various different parts of the broader community, it will enable my organization to attract and retain great people, build loyalty among customers, make more forward-thinking decisions that may seem not optimal in the very short term, but better for the long term. And those things combined drive more long-term shareholder value. I think that's the prevailing mindset, which means there'll always be extremes that don't like it. There'll be a group of extreme on one end that will say, no, I need the returns today. I don't want to hear about that. We'll deal with the long term in the long term. Right now, you just go generate returns. They will find this uncomfortable and not what they thought business was there to do. And there'll be a group of people on the other extreme who will say, well, no, you're still optimizing to drive shareholder value, even if it's in a long-term sense. And I want you just to focus on these other elements, or much more predominantly. And therefore, this statement is window dressing or greenwashing or whatever words put around it. I don't think this is intended to satisfy either extremes of that debate, but it is to sort of go in the center, the middle 60% or 70%, and really say we're there to deliver sustained value to multiple parts of the community, including our owners. And I think that's quite appealing.
Okay. So I'm going to come back to your COVID advice. And the second piece of advice is keep your long-term goals in mind. And then again, to quote you, you got to cut through bureaucracy. That's really an objective of every CEO and every top grade. When the world is literally changing by the day, you need to ensure that the normal processes and procedures designed for a very different time are not getting in the way. And so here, my question is, do you think that firms are taking advantage of this upside, which is you have a burning platform due to COVID, where you can bust some bureaucracy and really create the agility that will put you in a better place for the long term? And so is that actually a silver lining of COVID?
It's complete. That, along with the ways that we work and all that we've experienced, even including the way this conversation is taking place, that is, those are two of the most important silver linings out of this. And it's happened for, what we've observed is it's happened for a few reasons. One is, of course, the speed and uncertainty means you just need much more real-time decision making. So that the normal pace that decisions flow in an organization, for which processes have been created over years and are multi-layered and slow things down, it just doesn't work for the world that we're living in. Second, the technology is a hierarchy buster. I mean, I've heard this from so many CEOs, and I see it personally. You get on a Zoom, and if you're doing it in a good way, you've got everybody sort of at the same hierarchy, including you as the CEO. You know, you're just one pane on the window, or maybe, you know, people pin you, so you got a little bigger picture. But like it really levels things out a bit, and it allows you. It would never make sense to fly people from 3 levels come into a huge conference room for a meeting. But suddenly in Zoom, you can open up the participation to more people. You can drive initiatives faster. And so this idea that we can break hierarchy, we can work across functions and geographies much more seamlessly, and the times we live in demand it. So it's not just an ability, but it's also an imperative. I think those things have really created a different cultural feel. And many CEOs I talk to do not, of course, want to have their, you know, many of their employees being forced to work at home all the time. And they certainly don't like the stresses that individuals are feeling of balancing work and home when kids aren't in school and health pressures. So of course we want that to go away, but they're really hoping to hang on to this sense of we're one team. The role of hierarchy's gotten diminished. The ability to move faster, to take decisions is there. In a world where digital is, even before this is not the pandemic, but digital was accelerating in so many places. But this was a key requirement to break down the barriers across organizational boundaries. That's happening. I think that's one of the things people are most hoping to hang on to.
Are there particular companies that you would point to where you think they've just done a really good job of responding to COVID and keeping themselves not just on track, but really advancing themselves?
Honestly, I wouldn't just point to one. I don't have like one organization in mind that has done. I think in their own ways, many companies, you know, have tried to do that. I was on the phone with the board of Verizon last week. You know, well, obviously, just like this is Chatham House, I can't discuss the details, but you look at a company like Verizon, hundreds of thousands of people, right? Like what they've done to keep people safe, to try to provide a service, which is now the lifeblood for many of us, you know, to stay connected to the world, to retool very complex organizations. I think, you know, I look at organizations like that, even the biggest and, you know, giant telcos are viewed as, you know, relatively hierarchical and not necessarily fast moving places. And yet I think you see it across many, many parts of the economy. Now, any of them, probably maybe not everyone, but the vast majority would say there's so much work left to do, because this is also highlighted. I mean, to the degree to which technology and digital and analytics was an important trend before, it's more important, and you need to go even faster. The need to create more agile organizations is even more of imperative. The opportunity to change the way work gets done on a lasting basis is even of greater opportunity. So I don't think anybody not us just looking at how BCG runs or any of our clients would say, like, this is the model, we figured it out. I think it just was a positive milepost on a way to building different kind of businesses for the years ahead, and a lot of work left to do.
So, so many of us have managed to keep moving forward in the face of these very traumatic times, and technology has enabled that. It's leveled things, it's created greater access. So there are many positive aspects, but at the same time, it's made us miss something quite a lot, which is human connection. And so there seems to be, in our business, we know this matters a lot, and I would think in the BCG business, this matters a lot. So can you tell us about the tension between innovations that really have been helpful that you'd like to see sticky in the way you work moving forward relative to the need to maintaining human contact, maintaining relationships? So in other words, how's this going to change BCG? Are you not going to be on the road all the time after this, for example?
Well, let me get to us second. I think I want to talk about the first part of your question, which is we have to recognize in some ways it's created more human connectivity in the ways I was describing earlier. I think more people feel more connected to the senior leadership of the organization. More people feel maybe connected to people in other parts of the world because they would only get to meet them, once a quarter. Like, the power of the technology to bring people together in different ways has been very much a positive for many people's point of views. And at the exact same time, to your point, the personal relationship you build with the people you're closest to, the ones you would have been in the office with, or in our case on a client team with, those are frayed, and you're not frayed, but those are just more challenged because you lose all the informal parts. The part that's on Zoom, the normal meeting, actually is probably as good as many meetings were sitting in conference rooms before, in some ways better. But all the informal stuff around it, grabbing lunch together, traveling to a location together, the informal hallway connections, that stuff's diminished, and that has a cost. And what we observe is, and what I hear many, many clients say, is that you've built up a lot of social capital in the organization over time. So for the people that have been around a long time, have formed their own web of connections, it's hard, and you miss something at a very personal level, but it's kind of fine. It's hardest for people that are new to the organization. And it's particularly hard for people who don't have a base of work experience in their careers. So people just joining organizations, the apprenticeship, the sense of culture and community, the building of a network of people you can talk to get advice. Like, all of that stuff is much harder. And so we have put, but I don't say us alone, I hear it from others too, enormous emphasis, particularly with our mid-levels of our project leaders and our principals and our partners. So, like, you have to spend extra time with people, not about, what's going on their module and how are things going, but how are they doing? How are they feeling? What's a struggle? Where do they wish they had a little more support? You have to really take a little extra time to connect with people as people, not just as a team that's a machine to get something done. And that part has gotten much harder. And so now when you ask us, there are two parts to that question if you come back to like BCG. One is, do we want people working from home the way they've been working from home? We will be able to have more days when someone can work from home. We for sure learned that. But we want people back to be in offices and connecting with each other. We have such a young organization. We have so many people that join every year. We need that sort of informal connectivity as soon as we can get it back in a safe way, which in some parts of the world has already started, but certainly in the US, it's really not the norm in the vast majority of situations. The second is around travel to clients. There, I think we do want to have client travel come back, but not to the degree we had it before. We've made a net zero climate commitment that we'd lower our business travel emissions by 30% over the next 5 years. We hope we can get there faster because we've learned so much in this period. But that still means, 2/3 plus of what we do to get our teams with clients, we're going to keep, at least for the immediate, the medium term future, because we see real value, just like to build relationships within teams, to build them with the clients on our teams, to sort of be there together with them to help. I don't see us going to a world of zero travel, but I do think we'll be able to do less. I thought we could do it last December. We were ready to make a substantial net zero commitment even before the pandemic hit. We just delayed it, frankly, because of this. But I think we all have much more confidence that this is workable now. We were doing it there sort of as a leap of faith a year ago. Now we're doing it with confidence that we can make different kinds of models work.
So one last question, and then I'm kind of going to move on from COVID, but I'm not really, because it manages to kind of pop up in everything that we think about. So the question is, what have you learned about yourself as a leader because of going through this COVID crisis? What have you added to your arsenal in terms of being able to work more effectively with others?
Well, look, I will tell you, the first thing I've learned is just the way I did my job before. I mean, I spent 70% of my time on the road for 7+ years, before this hit. I mean, that's the way we describe my job. You're the CEO, you're in 50 countries around the world, you care about your team, you care about your clients, you're just on the road a high percentage of the time. I would never do my job the same way again. I actually feel more connected. Now, some of there's more receptivity. Many CEOs of our clients who would have expected to want to see me, but when you come to town, give me a call. If I'm in town too, we'll meet. Now you say, and that could be months away, right? Till I happen to get to that individual specific city. Now you say, like, should we get 30 minutes on a Zoom call? And they're like, absolutely. And you can do that with weeks notice, not months notice. And it's a very warm, it's a perfectly fine thing. I would still love to be in cities sometimes to be able to see people face to face. But I think this idea that I had to travel to be there, to be able to be connected to the market, connected to our teams, has really changed dramatically. And I'll eventually transition out of this role, but I'm sure whoever comes after me, I did the job logistically very much like my predecessor. I think the person who comes after me would obviously then approach it in a different model, looking ahead. I think the second thing is it reinforces the power of teams. I mean, what I learned in this was I'm sort of geared this way anyway, but this was the biggest reinforcement of my career. You put great people in roles and you invest like crazy to help them understand what they're doing, work collaboratively. But when the moment hits, you cannot direct from the top. Like it is, at least we found the empowerment and the entrepreneurial spirit in BCG, where people just figured out what they could do to jump in. They proactively reached out to help others in the organization. That's stuff you can't, first, you don't know enough to make the right decisions at the top. And second, cooperation is not something you legislate. Cooperation is something you spend years building a culture that does that. And I just saw that come to the fore. The person who's leading BCG's COVID response is a guy named Maran Jaya, great senior partner in Chicago. I wrote an article for Fortune in March of the pandemic with what I thought needed to happen. And he called me like a week later. He said, I want to help. Like, I want to help. And out of the blue, I hadn't even thought of reaching out to him. And then he just took over, like building a team that ended up working all around the world, because we were working in, I think, 40 countries. BCG did work on COVID of one form or another. And he built this whole thing, like, not because he was ordered to, not because he felt he had to, because he thought he could make a unique difference at this moment in time. He reached out, and I just saw so many examples of that. It really just puts this emphasis on this intersection of team, purpose, culture, and how you bring those together, and how much that is the driver in moments of crisis to sort of help you get through it, more than how much as the CEO and how you can make all the smart decisions and do that. I mean, and that for me was a huge reinforcement.
So I want to pick up on team, purpose, and culture, and change the subject a little bit, which is to talk about racial equity and justice. Of course, I'm not really changing the subject because this is one of the dimensions of the COVID crisis, which has really been brought to life. But in response to the terrible events exposed during these COVID times, many CEOs made commitments in the area of racial equity and justice. And so my question is, do you think that this is a time when companies will truly make progress in this space?
First, I think the commitments are real. I just happened to get off a BRT board call just before I called you when they list their top 4 priorities for next year. This is like one of the things that's on the list. You know, we were very much a part of helping a number of the teams that Mary Barra at GM was leading, Jamie Dimon was, and Robert Smith were leading on the finance side. I think that the belief that we need to do more, much more, and business needs to be at the forefront of it, not as a laggard being pulled along, I think that's very deeply held. I think that the challenges are quite real, and it takes many years of effort. I've watched that in our own diversity efforts, where I genuinely think we've shown a lot of progress over time, and we've also genuinely shown we have so much work to do. So I believe the commitments are real. I believe we will see progress. It's going to take a while, and I think and I understand why society would look at business and say, look at these diversity metrics, they're not where they should be, and they're right. You know, where will you be a year from now or 2 years from now? Why can't, a year, 2 years, a long time, get it done. And it just takes a long time. So I think that the challenge in front of business is first to embed the initiatives deeply in the organization. If it's just an overlay on top, that always fades over time. So how do you embed it really deeply? How do you, at least internally, whatever you report externally, force a high degree of transparency to know where you really stand, measure the right elements on attracting, retaining talent, promoting up through leadership ranks, all of the things that creating inclusive cultures in the way you get feedback, from your employee populations, and be able to show that you're making progress, even if it doesn't happen as fast. And rightfully, I think the pressure from society is good for business, but you've got to be able to do that. I think it's real. I think it will continue. I think the external view of it will be, well, it does seem like some things are really happening, but boy, it feels slower than I would like it to be. Frankly, I think for many CEOs, it probably feels the same way, to be honest.
So again, coming back to this notion of who do you trust, and coming out of the 2008 crisis, business had 2 black eyes. But now what's so fascinating is some recent data suggests that the person you trust most to tackle issues of racial justice is, again, your employer. And so for 2 of the big dimensions of the COVID crisis, business seems to have this opportunity to really establish itself as having real purpose and real value to changing society in positive ways. So any other advice in terms of how we make sure that we don't lose that momentum and actually disappoint people with the lack of progress in a space that's so critical to our future?
Well, the most important thing is to be able to make tangible progress and to show that there are substantial goals in place. Those goals may not be as fast as some people want, but that there's real progress being made. I think the intent, which I think is genuine, is coming through, and that's probably producing some of the results you just quoted. But intent only gets you so far over the medium term. So in 2 to 3 years from now, when people are talking about this, intent won't be enough. It will have to be enough businesses can point to really having made a step change in building more diverse and inclusive environments, put tangible things in place that are showing meaningful impact. I mean, that's the bar, and words alone will not meet that bar. I'm sure not everyone will, but I'm hopeful that enough places will show progress that it'll be perceived as genuine caring, and we just want it to go faster. But if they don't, then it'll be cynicism that gets produced. Anytime you give trust to someone and then it seems to not be warranted, you end up producing at least cynicism among a subset of people. And we're living with a lot of cynicism and distrust in this world right now. It will not take so much for it to be turned to the business world. And so it's a fragile trust that's been earned. I think it's been earned, but it's fragile.
Okay. So let's now turn to politics and the intersection of politics and business. And I think it's safe to say that the Trump administration really changed the way that business interacts with the political world. And so let's start with your personal experience, which is in 2016, you were invited to participate in a business forum for the Trump administration to provide strategic and policy advice on economic issues. How did that go for you?
It was a unique experience. I would say I entered it because I felt like it was a responsibility, regardless of your views. When you're asked to serve on something like that, and you're told you can say whatever you want, there's no rules. Like, there were no rules of engagement. You're only allowed to talk about this or that. We were able to speak on the topics we thought were important, and I thought it was a real responsibility to contribute to that. And I felt like I could do that. And the first meeting we had with the president was right after what was later called the Muslim ban was put on 7 countries. I talked about how that was hurting our ability to attract talent to the country, why I didn't think that was the right thing to do. And I was able to say it directly to him and to General Kelly at that point, who was coming in to run Homeland Security. He hadn't been confirmed yet, but he was likely to do that. So I felt like, and then on trade, on immigration, on climate, like there was a chance to really put ideas into it. About 4 months in, when we chose to walk away from the Paris Accords, and the administration did not, us, but that was the choice that was made. And then over that summer, where so many things happened, culminating in Charlotte, I think a number of us concluded that it was true you could say what you believe, but it wasn't seeming to translate into actions necessarily that were aligned with not just my own input, but the input of a number of the other business leaders, and the other things were creating such a halo, potentially being associated with it, seeming to endorse these policies and views that were so different than values that many of us held, that we decided nearly unanimously to disband ourselves. And then the president tweeted that he disbanded us an hour before we had told him, and an hour before we issued it. Fine, however it's communicated, but I thought it wasn't having the impact you wanted, and frankly, it was creating a real sense of disharmony in our various communities, not just my own, but others as well. So that's where we ended up.
So BCG is not a political organization, and yet it's been accused of being in the midst of politics because it's helped with transition planning for both Republican and Democratic administrations. So, this polarized world enters into your environment. How do you deal with that when people start to make claims that you're actually supporting a particular political view?
Look, we try to there's 2 separate things. One, we try to stay out of the politics of it, campaigns, advocacy for candidates, as much as we can. Obviously, each person at BCG is an individual. Many are citizens of the US or other countries. They should participate as individuals. But as a firm, we avoid in any ways we can being associated with political campaigns or things like that. But more effective government, regardless of who's leading it, is something we believe in. And whether it's our public sector practice, whether it's the Center for Presidential Transitions that we've supported since 2011, I think, through today, like we will try to help to make transitions effective. There's an enormous amount riding on bringing in many cases, a whole new team in a short period of time. And so we try to help there. And as it relates to issues that may have political overtones, but that we believe we have a clear view on based on our judgment of the data and understanding of how things work, what's the right thing to do. We'll take stands that we wish weren't viewed as political stands or just legitimate policy discussions. But of course, in today's very polarized world can be misinterpreted, whether that's on immigration topics, climate topics, diversity and inclusion as it relates to different elements. I mean, we've taken very clear and sharp stands on what we believe is appropriate, not with an intent to be political, but because we believe that was the right thing to do, both consistent with our purpose and values and what we believe would move the country forward. And I think that's, all businesses are facing those choices right now of how to get that balance right, and we're doing our best to do that.
So some have argued that that in some ways the current administration has done the business community a favor by getting them to step into societal issues.
Sorry, I lost you for a second. You said the current administration. I got you. You froze for a second.
Yeah, has done the business community a favor by getting them to step into societal issues where previously they'd been on the sidelines. And so one good example of this is climate change. When the government pulled out of the Paris Accords, the business community stepped forward in a significant way. And so my question is, with the new administration coming in, do you think the business community will lose some of that momentum and say, okay, now we're going to turn it back over to the administration, which seems to be very much concerned about climate change issues?
I think it's going to present different kinds of challenges, and because I actually don't think the business community will change so much in its views, but the way it has to position. If I take climate, the business community believes, I think increasingly, climate change is real, it's man-made, the risks are enormous, we need to get on it. So I think that that's pretty broadly shared across not every CEO, I'm sure, but many. But then how do you get on it? Well, first, you can do more as a company than you thought you could. And that's constantly our message. We've now worked with so many large and really terrific companies. And when you go in and you see they can go further on improving, even in the current environment, than they thought they could. But they cannot, many of them, particularly in the hard to abate industries, go far enough. So you need a public sector to help. But the question is, how will the public sector help? So if it helps by pricing carbon, well, the business community's largely endorsed that it believes carbon should be priced. If it's around supporting innovation and more advanced technologies, I think the business community's all in. If it's trying to make sure that companies that go far enough are that go pretty far but bear some additional costs, don't have their customers able to go to another country to buy products there, and you need to do that. I think the business community very much wants to protect the companies that are doing the right thing from then having their business go away because their cost may be slightly higher than somebody else's. But there's a fourth dimension, which is the whole regulatory environment. If the way that governments is just puts more and more rules, not just on outputs, we don't want methane leaks. That's an output measure that applies to everyone. That's understood. But a lot of regulatory burden. I think most businesses feel this isn't the most effective way to go after this. There are better tools in the toolkit. Now we have a divided government, and we have an administration that the only thing it controls directly is regulatory. And those other three elements, pricing carbon, protecting the border, so to speak, of, for those who are approaching it, and investing in innovation, has to be done jointly between Congress and the administration. So I do think there's a risk that if the only lever the new administration can pull and feels obliged to pull very hard as a regulatory lever, then it will seem like business never cared about climate. But I don't think that's the case. I actually think that there's a basis to move forward with a public sector and private sector involvement. But if in such a divided government, if nothing can happen legislatively, then we're at a risk of it seeming at cross purpose. And I hope we'll avoid that. I hope we'll show that even on the regulatory side, there's some very productive things that could be done and some unproductive things, and we can get to a reasonable place. But I do think there's a risk on that topic and several others that what seems to be today well-intentioned business desire to move things forward, depending on the approaches taken by the administration, business might say, look, we don't think this is a productive approach. We think it's going to deter growth and investment. We think it'll hurt the economy and in other ways create real harm. And not be supportive. And I think that will be a tension that really has to get managed very carefully. I'm hopeful there's a way to bring government together and business to find real solutions. But we can't be naive. It's been very hard in the past. We'll find out in the coming months if it's more possible this time around.
So you and I have had conversations in the past about immigration reform. The BRT has been very active in this space. Do you think that's an area where the business community will be able to back away, that we'll see appropriate immigration policy emerge, or is this going to need to be an ongoing area of focus?
Oh, I think the business community will push like crazy to get a better immigration policy through. Certainly as it relates to bringing talent into this country, business more acutely than many other parts realizes how much immigration has been a lifeblood of growth and innovation and entrepreneurial spirit in this country. I think the implications with DACA and young people, I think the business community has been quite supportive to try to protect those individuals and to give them a path. But I also think there's a genuine desire for a bipartisan solution so that it doesn't become a political football from one time to the next, and that we were close. There was the Gang of Eight in the Senate that had gotten, I think there were 69 senators, if I remember the number, that voted in favor. It's not that it's an impossible, it's a heavy lift. It's not an impossible lift. And I think that, and by the way, I think this election may have helped a bit because Latino voters clearly are not monolithic in their views and clearly were more divided in their votes. So if there was a view perhaps that Republicans held that, making this easier would necessarily hurt Republicans, I think that there may be more of a sense that actually it's not a destiny that one party owns those. No party ever owns a group of people forever, but that it's not automatic of which side they go. Maybe that can help, but there also need to be some concessions on the Democratic side to get to compromise. I mean, we need both sides to work together. I'm hopeful, but I think the business community will weigh in heavily to try to get this over the goal line. Whether it'll be successful or not, it wasn't the last two tries under two previous presidents. Let's see.
Let's hope.
I agree.
So you've been fairly open about the notion that the role that business will play in the next administration will change. And so what advice are you giving to CEOs in terms of how they can be most effective with the incoming administration?
Well, I think it's advice on both sides. I think the goal is to engage and try to get solutions that move the country forward. And moving the country forward includes having a vibrant economy that creates growth and spreads opportunity across the entire citizenry, not just, the one subsegment of the population. And I think business believes that, and clearly this government was elected partly to deal with issues that were front and center in the campaign, but partly to sustain economic growth and opportunity. That should create opportunities. So I think the main thing is you've got to engage. And sometimes I'm sure that will mean, historically, business had a lot of disagreements with Democratic administrations. I think we'd be kidding ourselves there'll be no disagreements looking ahead. But there have also been a lot of disagreements with the last administration, with the Trump administration, on a range of topics you've raised. So I think the goal of business is carve out a principle-based view about how to create opportunity, a better world, and tackle big issues, and stay true to that, and then look to forge compromise where we can in an exceptionally divided world. So that bar is very high, but try to do it.
Do you have any advice in terms of how to bring people together in a world that is so very divided and polarized?
I think conversation is essential. I think fact-based is essential. I think looking for everybody to get a win out of it, is really important. I think, frankly, in the last administration, we saw several examples of that. In Trump administration, USMCA ended up getting a lot of support on both sides of the aisle. The reform measures around sentencing and prison reform, I think, ended up getting a lot of consensus. It is possible to find it on topics, but it's not so easy when the anger and the vitriol, all around can be really high. And so I think business is in a unique position because it is on the cycle of trust and distrust, and business has seen that go up and down many times. It's on the higher trust end right now. And I think that obviously has credibility with Republicans, but I think certainly with this administration, I think Joe Biden has, indicated a desire to work with all parts of the community, including the business community. So my hope is it's a unique moment where business can help. But it's hard to want to be too optimistic because we've seen so many challenges in bringing things together, particularly at the federal level. I think states and local governments have often done terrific things to move things forward. It's been harder in the federal government, but there's an opportunity and we'll see what happens. I think there's a very small number of people that have to make some choices about what they want to stand for and be remembered for these next coming years. And the choices that they make in that will go a long way to determining if it's possible to forge compromise. And we'll see.
Okay, so we are running close to the end of our time together, unfortunately. So I want to close out the conversation with your final piece of advice around the response to COVID, which is keep your imagination alive. And to quote you, it's to preserve a sense of optimism about a better day. And so what have you been able to do within BCG to create that sense of imagination, creativity, and optimism? And then what can you say to our listeners to let them end this conversation on a note of positivity and optimism?
So the first thing in generating true optimism is to be seen as dealing in reality. Ducking the reality, including the very difficult reality of what we're living right now as this pandemic rages across the country and the risk of literally hundreds of thousands of more deaths. I mean, to deny that, to pretend it's not real, to not engage in what it will take to change that curve, as difficult as that is on many levels, I think then you're not having a real conversation. And I think right now this country needs to realize the risk that we're putting so many of our citizens in if we can't get some degree of control and the amount of personal behavior it requires. So I want to answer your question, but I think we have to deal with that reality right now, which is harsh and scary. Against that, though, when we talk silver linings, we try to bring it to life through stories. I don't think people remember, much as BCG is known for its frameworks and concepts, I actually think what most of us remember are stories that illustrate those frameworks, bring them to life. I think right now the stories about our capacity to learn, our capacity to change, our capacity to team in new ways, our capacity to make a difference in the world, it's been an unbelievable year on those dimensions. And what I'm constantly trying to do at BCG is to acknowledge how difficult it's been, how hard people have had to work, the circumstances they're often having to be in right now, like to deal with the reality, but then also to talk about those other elements and how much we can take away from this, how much we've grown personally, each of us in big ways, and how much we can take personally as we look ahead for the kind of impact we can make in the world and for the ways we can build communities in new and different ways, not to keep doing what we're doing now, but to take what we've learned now and not do what we did a year ago either. I think that's the messages that try to convey. And I think all of those things are relevant for individuals, as they look at their careers, whether they're just at the beginning stages or deeper in, to look at their careers, to look at what gives them satisfaction, to look at their own personal growth, to realize how much we can change more than maybe we think, and to take that with them after such a difficult and stressful year.
Well, thank you so much, Rich, for both sharing your wisdom along with telling the truth and giving us a sense of optimism for a better day. It is so appreciated that you spent this time with the Duke community. Thank you.
It's a real pleasure to be with all of you. So and thank you for doing this. Have a great evening.